Are you looking for a cool gift for your grandchildren that will not get broken? Fall victim to being a fad gift? Of course you are. Be the coolest grandpa ever. Narrate a children's ebook in your own voice and send it to your grandchild. They will be able to read along on their tablet or mobile device as the story comes to life with the sound of your own voice. Recording a book on makemementos.com allows you to create a truly personalized gift. By recording a specially chosen book for your grandchild, you can create something that will last a lifetime. Anytime they want to hear your voice, all the grandchildren need to do is play back the recording. Take it from me, creating a recorded book on Make Mementos is super easy. You simply select the book you want to record, and then start recording your voice reading the book to your grandchild. Best of all, you can start out the book by recording a short 30-second video introduction. This is a fun way to say hello before you start reading your book. If you mess up recording one of the pages, don't worry about it. You can always re-record a page until you're satisfied. It only takes a few minutes to record, but you're creating a memory that will last a lifetime. Best of all, your recording can be passed down and shared with future generations. To start the process of recording your own family keepsake, go to makemementos.com/pages/thecoolgrandpa and get started today. If you missed the link, I will have it posted in the show notes and in the affiliate section of my website.
Do you also find it difficult to build up a meaningful relationship with your grandchildren at a distance? As a long-distance aunt to a 2-year-old in Australia, I wanted to create solutions for the millions of family members who cannot be physically together all the time. This is why I created Peekabond, an app that helps you to connect with young children at a distance. The app works with the following 3 steps. First, we give playful activities suggestions that are based on your child's development stage. These suggestions are science-based and gamified. Secondly, you can create a private family circle. And finally, we'll let you send videos back and forth so you don't have to be live at the same time, and save them in one spot for your grandchild to watch. We've got over 120 content suggestions. You can build a love bank for your grandchildren. And if you go to the Cool Grandpa website and look for the affiliate links, sign up for a newsletter with a lot of inspiring content, or you can try the app for free.
Hi, and welcome into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited for you to join us this week because I've got some fantastic guests that are on. This is going to be one of the first for the Cool Grandpa podcast in that I have a grandma and a grandpa on the podcast at the same time. Now, Emily and Mike Morgan are the podcast hosts for the Grand Life podcast. You are going to enjoy this conversation because we get into talking about their experiences and their approaches and how they grandparent. And then we also talk about their podcast, the Grand Life podcast, which I was recently a guest on. So you're going to enjoy this conversation, and I don't want to spoil too much. But before we get started, I do want to remind you that I do have a new way that you can support the podcast, and that is by going to buymeacoffee.com/coolgrandpa. Now, this is a great way that you can donate a small amount of money to help offset some of the costs for producing and hosting this podcast. So if you're so inclined, I'd love to have your support. I have a link in the show notes as well as on the website. So if you don't remember this, you can go to my website, cool-grandpa.us, and you can look for the link in this show notes as well as in other places on the podcast. The last thing I want to do is remind you, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe and share this podcast with 3 different friends that really could use some encouragement as well as just enjoying some really cool conversations about being a grandparent and a grandfather in particular. So without further ado, let's jump into our conversation. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, Emily. Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'm really going to enjoy this conversation and getting to know you two better.
Well, same here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Now, normally what I always have is typically it's just one person. I think this is the first time I've ever had a grandma and grandpa on at the same time. So this is going to be an interesting conversation.
Well, we're kind of used to at least having two people on the conversation. So what's another one, right?
I'll say we're getting used to it.
Oh,
we
yeah.
didn't start out this way, but I'm sure we'll talk about that before the night's over.
Yes, absolutely. One of the questions, though, that I always like to ask the grandparents when I have them on the show is, take me back to when you first heard that you were going to become a grandparent. And what was that emotion? What was that reaction like? And I'll let you two decide who wants to go first with this.
I'm getting a cue that I should go first. And so, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I just want to make sure I read that cue right. I was not ready to become a grandparent. I mean, there wasn't anything wrong with the time or the year or my age or their age or anything like that. But I just was not mentally prepared for that particular milestone to be crossed. It took me until just after the first grandchild was born before I realized that everything was going to be okay.
Yeah, it didn't hurt that the first grandchild looked just like him.
Yeah, that did help. I mean, my ego was certainly nourished by that.
He came out with a huge head of blonde hair, and everybody was like, "Whoa, that looks just like Mike." I was ecstatic. I was just thrilled, but I tried really hard not to be too thrilled because our oldest daughter was not thrilled that she got pregnant so early into their marriage. So I was really trying to hold back my enthusiasm because I was trying to be sympathetic and empathetic to her. Who it was tears and I'm pregnant and that kind of thing.
Sure.
Kind of interesting.
So the virtue score was a little higher for Emily because she was more concerned about the adult child. I was a little bit obsessed with how it affected me. So,
Well, I really appreciate you being honest with that because the range of reactions that I get is very similar, to I'm way too young for this. What are you doing to me? I'm not old. I'm not a grandparent yet. And then there's also the other extreme of, boy, I didn't think those kids would ever give me grandkids.
well, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're very fortunate. We're very happy with all of our grandkids.
That's awesome. And, because I've got two grandparents here, what I'd like to know is how have you guys developed your grandparenting style and how do you grandparent together? Because I know, typically I'm talking to a grandfather or a grandmother and, we're talking about how they engage with the kids, but this is a unique opportunity to talk to two people about how do you do this thing together and what are some of the insights that you guys have?
Well, we definitely have two different styles of grandparenting. And, I was thinking about this because I was like, it's very similar and parallel, at first at least, when we became grandparents. It was very similar to the way we parented. And that is, in all honesty, I was much more hands-on as a parent, and Mike was working a lot and wasn't as hands-on.
So there are really three factors at play here. One is she is a very natural, capable, heart-level nurturer. And so she sort of came into her element as a mother, and it was immediate and it was significant. Other two things going on were, yes, I was working a lot, but also I am not a heart-level nurturer by nature. And so I found quickly that I felt like I was standing in her shadow. And, my my ego at the time had a hard time with that. And so I tended to recede into the corner a little bit as a parenting force. And I don't want to leave this topic, but
Right.
when we fast forward to how grandparenting works, that's the platform from which we think about how we grandparent. But you may want to continue
Yeah.
on that.
But we fell into that role again. It was so weird. It was like, oh, okay, now we're back in the same situation. And I'm much more, I'm interjecting myself more and I'm more into it and he's less into it. But I think what happened over time, with time and attention, was that Mike started to become more involved and recognize that he needed to be, and I was giving him more space to be involved. So we were kind of giving and taking. And I think that comes from a little bit of age and a little bit of wisdom and recognizing we didn't want to repeat the same pattern again.
That's the big one.
Yeah.
We didn't want to make the same mistake twice.
Yeah. So that's how it is. And, it's interesting because as we've thought about this, Michael and I are like two parts of a brain. So I'm the heart and he's the head. Not that we don't each have a heart and we don't each have a brain, but it's just the way we grandparent now.
It's what you lead with. Most people are right-handed or left-handed, right? It's not that the other hand doesn't work. It's what you lead with. It's what you work best with.
Right.
She works best as a heart-level nurturer. I work best as a head-level nurturer.
Right.
And as grandparents, we figured that out enough to be able to give each other room to do those things which we would want to lead with. So
I nurture and he spends time with the kids, like explaining things and factual things and logical things. So he's the left brain, I'm the right brain. And it's just it works pretty well now. We've figured out, we've gotten our rhythm.
Well, and as you were developing that rhythm, did you find that you needed to prompt each other a little bit? And like, oh, hey, Mike, this is something that's in your wheelhouse. Why don't you take this? And hey, Emily, can you deal with, whatever's going on with this issue?
I think so.
I'd like to say that it's explicit like that, but it isn't. I think post-game analysis is a place where I feel like that happens. But in the middle of the action, it's very difficult for me to go, and then say something like you suggested, which sounds great in theory. In practice, I'm not good at that.
Well, I think it's organic, really. I mean, and I have to say that there are times when I step back and I watch him helping the kids with fishing, which he likes to do in the little pond that we have, or with rockets that he loves to shoot off with the kids. And I step back and I just celebrate that. I think that's so amazing. It's not something I would want to do. I have no interest in standing around making sure kids don't get burned with a rocket engine, but I love watching him do it. And I think, you probably enjoy watching me with the kids when we're reading books or we're talking and having conversations.
Well, there are times when one of the grandchildren will react in a certain way, and I can see that you've done about 4 steps of mental calculus very quickly to get yourself to a way of responding or a way of accommodating or a way of reacting. And when I realize what you've just done faster than I could blink an eye, I'm glad that you're the one doing that right then.
Yeah.
Well, and what you're describing to me is some awesome teammates that, and Mike, this goes back to that post-game analysis, but what I was hearing is almost like when you have basketball players that just a no-look pass because I know somebody's going to be 15 feet and, this angle or, however those athletes that build that chemistry together where you don't have to necessarily say something, but you have to trust the other one's going to be there and what they're going to do and how they're going to react. So yeah. I think that's really awesome and that you've been able to get to that spot.
Yeah, it's taken 40 years.
Oh yeah, it doesn't happen year one.
Doesn't happen overnight.
Right. Now, not only are you two really all-stars when it comes to grandparenting, but you have this podcast, the Grand Life Podcast, and I'm curious about what prompted you to get into podcasting and what prompted you to start this Grand Life Podcast.
Well, it all started in a 50-watt station outside Wichita. No, it actually did start with a campus FM public radio affiliate where at the university where we were both going to school. And we both got jobs as student board operators at this radio station. At about the same time, I was just a little bit ahead of her getting her job. And so I ended up being her trainer when she started working at this station. So that's kind of where we both started developing a fondness for radio. I started out in television. I thought that was going to be my career. And then I had this epiphany where I realized that sound without picture and story forces you to engage your imagination. And when that happened, I started consuming a lot more of public radio and podcasting. So that's how I spent my time as a volunteer, as a sort of a content creator, amateur style. And then I'll let Emily explain how the creative part happened.
Well, in terms of content, that's really where I think I shine, and that is that I love to write and I like to think of ideas. I'm very creative. That's my right brain. And so I can come up with all sorts of concepts and creative things, but I can't implement them because my brain doesn't work the other way. So we are two parts of one brain, and that way it works really well. I mean, we depend on one another. There is no way that the Grand Life podcast could happen without each of us doing our part. So I'm grateful because I always have these ideas. It doesn't matter whether it's a podcast or remodeling or whatever it is. I'm always like, I can't implement them, but I love this to happen. And then Mike figures out how to implement it.
So concept and execution is kind of where we divide that line.
Yeah.
And she was doing concept work without my need for execution for years as she was writing, and the publishers would do everything that, was necessary there. Then when we finally decided that we were going to marry that with our pre-existing love of sound and storytelling, it was really her idea and her invitation for us to start the Grand Life. And our model at the time was This American Life. We wanted to try to follow suit with that kind of journalistic style storytelling. And we found out two things real fast. And the first one is it is a ton of work to do that. And there's just two of us, and we have other things to do, like be grandparents. And the other thing we realized, and it took us until just the last 7 months or so to figure this out, is that that's not what people want as much as a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And connecting kind of at a human level, as opposed to just being told all this stuff that we diligently dug up like amateur reporters.
Yeah.
So we stopped that. We did 60 or 70 episodes that way, and it was exhausting.
Yeah, and this is much more fun, this conversational podcasting that we do. And Mike didn't start out being part of the podcast. I was the host, and I did it for 4 seasons.
My voice was almost never on the podcast.
which
is fine.
Right.
It's okay.
I tell him now I didn't want him to be on because everybody loves his voice so much that I was a little bit worried that once he got on, everybody would love him and not be interested in the podcast for what I had to say. But what's happened at this point is, yes, he's part of the podcast, that we're doing it together, and the response has been really good. People do love his voice, of course. I love his voice. So it all
I don't know
worked
what
out
to say
really well.
about that. It's 50 years in the making.
Yes.
Well, and I love that you guys have been able to work as a team to follow through, start this thing, and then be able to change it. Because I think sometimes people get to a point where, oh, this isn't working. And instead of doing a pivot move and let's rejigger this thing and figure it out and keep going, it's almost like, well, I'm just throwing up my hands and walking away from it. And
Yeah.
with what you two are doing, you've got so much experience. The stories are so great. I've been listening to the podcast, and I've really enjoyed this conversational style that you've pivoted over to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there's a lot of benefit by having you two on the podcast together versus like with me, you're getting my perspective and my grandpa perspective, but my wife, who isn't part of being with us, you're missing out on that. And I think you two
Sure.
provide a unique perspective by coming to the conversation together.
Oh, thank you.
There's another piece of feedback that we kind of took to heart from several people who are close enough to us to give us the bad news. It's easy to say, oh, we love it, it's great. But then sometimes somebody cares enough to go, you guys need to fix this. And the fix was that it sounded too positive. That is, we were only talking about things that were really sort of the ultimate positive expression of grandparenting or whatever. Now, I beg to differ. One of the episodes in our first season was the death of a grandchild, and it was an interview with a guy who was very open and very vulnerable about the fact that one of his grandchildren died. And so, there was some dark stuff there. However, overall, we probably weren't realistic enough. We weren't real enough or authentic enough for people to really get comfortable with us. And so now,
Well, I think
now we are.
it was intimidating. That's what we heard.
Okay,
People were
right.
like, we can't do that. We can't always be that good of a grandparent. We can't have grand camp. We don't want to do that. It's too hard, too much. We don't have the money. We don't have this. And so the feedback helped us to think about, well, we don't either for some of that stuff. So, we tried to present what other people do, but we don't always do that. And we have problems. So like the last episode we did was about how I couldn't get the shirt off of one of my grandchildren. It was like a muscle shirt and I couldn't release him from it.
His head was too big and the parents were watching on a Nest
camera. So it's like, oh
watching
my gosh,
us struggle
I'm so nervous.
and wrench his little neck around.
Right.
And
so yeah, we're just all out there now.
Well, and I think that's important. And one of the things that I would also just comment on is that it can be tough to find people that want to share bad stuff's not maybe the challenge part,
the
right?
challenges.
Because
yes.
it is personal, especially for having somebody come on to express what was going on with the loss of a grandchild.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I try to do, and I think you guys do too, is like, we're bringing some positivity and some information to you, but we know it's not all rainbows and sunshine.
Right.
Grandparenting can be really tough and really lonely, especially when expectations aren't met on either side. And there's a lot of things that grandparents do struggle through, and we try to help out with that. But I think we're all trying to go, hey, here's some people that are doing grandparenting and this is what they're doing. So pick and choose from that example and those stories. And then if it fits with your situation, great, use it, take it, run with it.
Right. Yeah. We literally, while we were in kind of sabbatical trying to figure out how we're going to continue, we thought we'd do something called Grandparents Underground. But then we realized what that sounded like. Okay, we were not buried yet.
Right.
But just the idea of kind of the grandparent secrets, things that we keep underground that kind of at a secret level we don't want to talk about. So
yeah, we couldn't figure out a way for that business plan to work. But there's a funny flip that's happened over the life of the podcast. One of the things that really was the trigger for Emily to start this was that she was mentoring some young moms, asking them, talking with them about things that they challenged, that challenged them in dealing with their own parents. And she frequently got people to say, oh, I wish you would tell my parents that.
Yes, that's right.
I wish there was a way that we could get this message to them. And so fast forward 4 years now, and we have to sit and think for every episode. Now, is there anything in this that our adult children would respond negatively to if they heard this? So it's gone from please tell my parents to we can't really tell this about to our children because they listen, right? We snuck our sixth season.
Say that again.
I'll do that again because you're going to edit this, aren't you? Tell me you're going to edit
this. Yeah, I'll edit
it. We snuck our sixth season back on the air without telling them. Well, they found it anyway, but still, we do have to think, is this too much exposure to people who didn't ask for it? Meaning our adult children.
Yeah.
It's just a funny thing. I don't think anybody's going to, sever family ties over it, but sometimes it ends up being a conversation.
Oh, yeah. I can relate a little bit to that because I do know my wife, although she's not on the microphone and not here, she does listen. And then I know my mom listens too.
Uh-oh.
And so sometimes I've got to also be careful and do a little bit of filtering, not much, but a little bit of like, okay, is this too much family background or is this example or story, something that, could cause some awkwardness within the family.
Yeah.
What has been one of the maybe surprises that you've experienced while going through this podcast and starting with the conversation, or even back when you had a different format? Is there anything that jumped out at you as a surprise that you've learned about with grandparenting?
For me, it was how much work it is to do the other style, the journalism storytelling style of podcasting. It's easy to sit as a consumer of all this stuff that comes from NPR and places like that and think, oh, that's great, I'd like to do that. And then you actually sit about to do it, and it's an awful lot of work. That was the big surprise.
Yeah, and I think also for me, the work of getting the word out there and, social media and all of that kind of thing, that's just so against the grain for us. It's not something we love. It's not something we embrace very much. I think I have on my Facebook that I'm a reluctant Facebook user. I don't really love begging people to listen to us. And so as a consequence, I think we've really had to depend on word of mouth. My hope has always been, one of these days it's going to go viral. But in the process, we just continue to plug along and we get more and more people. It just takes time.
Well, and I think you're right about that, in that, for this topic of grandparenting, it's not like a super controversial, hot topic. You guys aren't coming on and talking about, a sports team, and you're not flaming up the fan base or anything. You're that's not what we do. We come out here and we share like, hey, here's some examples, here's some good stories, here's some challenges that people are facing. And so you don't have that edge, and we're not one of those, I don't know what the serial killer podcasts. And some of those things.
True crime podcasts.
Right.
It's very popular.
And,
we're not that.
Maybe I should start a grandparenting true crime podcast or something. But
but I think the other problem we're going to have, and always have had, is that we're a little bit ahead of the curve. I mean, we started, 4 years ago, and people literally, I would try to talk to grandparents about it, and they're like, what's a podcast? I don't even know what that is, and how would I listen to it? And I think it's still like that in some ways. I mean, I often have to say, when people say, oh, you have a podcast? One, they either ignore it because they don't really understand, and the other is they say, how do I get it? And I'm having to show them like the purple thing on their Apple phone and say, just push that, and then search in the search bar, right? The Grand Life. And it's still a little bit, I think in about 5 more years, there's going to be a ton of grandparent podcasts.
Oh, I hope so. And we've already got our foot in the door on that.
There you go. The old people that have been doing the Grand Life or Cool Grandpa forever. But it's been fun. And those episodes are there for however long, and many of them are not dated in the sense of, some of them we're talking about COVID and stuff, but many of them are, essential information that can go on for a long time.
Yes. Well, and those stories are just stories that continue. I mean, the stories that you're gathering, and some of the examples that you had, and I love the one about the winning and losing, and that you recently had about talking about gaming, and was thinking so much about that. It's like, that's been going on probably since ancient Greek time. Somebody's got a little kid out there, and they're, somebody's getting scolded for, let the little kid win, teach them how to do, keep them engaged. So these things are very evergreen, and they're just great examples that we're able to take down and record. And another benefit too is your grandchildren are going to have these and have these recordings, and, they're easily going to be able to go, geez, I wonder what Grandpa Mike was thinking, about this topic. And they could do a quick search and pull up an episode, and here's Mike explaining everything going on. Or, hey, what was Emily thinking?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I really don't think about that, but you're right. I'll be there for them.
Yeah, it's I kind of look at it a little bit like, we're creating a vocal diary or a audio diary for the grandkids, without having to sit down and think that, I've got to tell a story specifically for the grandkids, and writing it out like you would a diary. But this has been fun. So is there anything coming up next? I know you guys have had a big pivot and changed formats and probably getting your feet under yourselves. with this, but anything new, anything that you're branching out for, or new projects?
Well, I don't know. One of the things that I've always dreamed about doing from the time I was a child is a
live call-in.
live call-in show. And one of these days, I really want to do that. But I mean, you're putting yourself out there because, it's all impromptu. You just come off the cuff, which I actually like a lot. That's kind of our favorite thing, is off the cuff and not really planning too much. And we're trying so hard because I think in general, we're overthinkers. We talk about that in our podcast, but we tend to overthink. So we're trying really hard not to do that. And in essence, learning how to just work impromptu, and it's fun. And I would love to just, be somebody who people would call and ask questions of. I think that would be so much fun.
So if our mental headset here is of talk radio and the way we know that call-in and talk radio shows work, a lot of things have to align for that to work. You have to have an over-the-air broadcaster. You have to have an audience of people who are interested in what it is that you are talking about, and they all have to be listening at the same time so that you can have conversation in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Podcasting is kind of the opposite of that in so many ways, and so it would be a very big step to go in that direction. I personally think that there's some mix, some combination, some concoction that it would be possible to have the results sound like talk radio, but have all the inputs be a little different, have it more asynchronous, where the questions might come in at one time and the conversation and the answers might be something different than that. And there's one show on public radio that I think is doing this now in an interesting way. It's a public radio show called A1. It's a 2-hour talk show where the questions come in asynchronously. That is, they come in the morning or the day or several days before using a web tool. And then the conversation with hosts and experts is what happens in the real time of the show, but the callers don't.
Yeah.
So,
and we've been experimenting with that in the sense of at the end of each show, we always invite people to leave a voicemail at a number that we have set up, and also to email us. So if they would do that more as we grow and we get more people responding, we might be able to do that. But at this point, people are reticent to do that. I'm not really sure why. But I think with the conversational podcast, I think maybe we'll get more of that because we don't sound like we have all the answers. We're trying to get people to be engaging.
So we're trying to be less off-putting.
Yeah.
Given the feedback that we had gotten that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
Because we don't have it all together.
No,
Clearly.
but that's what life's about, right? It's like the three of us sitting at the coffee shop and just trying to figure out, whatever the challenge is or whatever the celebration is of an achievement, is just trying to figure it out. And we have to rely on each other to go, that's good advice, or that's not so good advice.
Right. And I love connection. Connection for me is key to connections with grandparents. I'm not a great networker, but I'm a great connector. I love to connect. And so that's kind of where we're at with our future, hopefully connecting with more grandparents like you and lots of other people.
Sure. Well, and I'm going to be sure to put the links to everything that we're talking about so people can reach out to you and they can maybe send you a question or a topic that they would love to have on the Grand Life.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
We want to make sure that our audiences get connected and that we are all supporting each other and being grandparents, because not one person has all the answers.
Right. And we will be having you on the Grand Life. So we'll get to have our Grand Life audience share and hear what you have to say.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm looking forward to that. Now, Emily and Mike, I've had you on for a little while. Is there anything about grandparenting or the Grand Life that I haven't asked you that you would like to talk about?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
I'm a little stumped by that question.
We love grandparenting. We're not perfect at it, but we just sure do love it, and we're grateful. So I guess that's really just, where we're at. And we just continue to learn because our grandchildren are growing. And so we have to learn to grow with them.
And the complexion of the podcast is going to change as they get older. that one that popped out looking like me, he's like almost
11.
12. Yeah, he's going on 12 now. So as the whole complement of grandchildren ages up and through, we're going to be responding in ways that I don't think we can predict.
Yeah, because now you're getting teenagers again.
Yep.
And, a whole new era for what teenagers are going through versus what your adult children went through when they were younger.
Oh, yeah.
I think I've always idealized the kind of a resource that a grandparent can be to a teenager because there's more of the head involved, and because you can be a friend and an advisor and a confidant and all these things that sometimes it's hard to be with a parent. I look forward to that challenge, and I know that I've got it wrong in my head compared to what it's going to actually work out to be, but I do really look forward to that.
Well, I think the key is for everything, including when they're young, is flexibility, right?
Yep.
And,
pivoting.
Yeah. 'Cause nothing goes to plan. So you better have B, C, D, E, and F all lined up and ready to go.
Absolutely. Good wisdom from you.
Well, Emily and Mike, where can people find the podcast? Where can people connect with you?
The easiest way to find the podcast is to just do a Google search for The Grand Life Podcast. And it's available in, quote unquote, wherever you get your podcasts. We also have a Facebook page called facebook.com/Grand Life Podcast, which is where we do almost all of the social media work that accompanies it.
And we have an Instagram, Grand Life Connection,
which we don't use as much.
No,
yeah,
really don't.
There's an email address, grandlifeconnection@gmail.com, all one word, Grand Life Connection. And then our phone number is always on the end of our every podcast episode for people to give us a call and leave a voicemail if they'd like to tell us something without having to write it out first, or if they'd like to give us their voice and then it ends up on the podcast.
Awesome.
You want to give that number out?
317-572-7876. 317-572-7876.
All right. I'll make sure to put links and the phone number in the show notes for us, and try to make it easy so folks are listening while they're driving around or out for a walk or whatever. They can go to my website, find this episode, and they've got all that information ready to go for them.
Thanks so much,
Greg.
So thank you so much again for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This has been a blast having you on and getting to know you a little better.
It was a pleasure. Thanks.
I had a blast talking with Emily and Mike. I really, really enjoyed how they found inspiration in other podcasts that they've incorporated and tried to bring into their podcast. It's always great to have that example that you're reaching for. And, some of these things that are out on NPR and in other areas are really good examples. And I'm glad I'm not the only one that looks to some of these other resources for inspiration, as well as trying to pick and choose what makes sense to add into my personal podcast. If you haven't done so, please remember to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so already, and please be sure to share the podcast. That's the best way you can help grow the audience and help people learn about this awesome role of being a grandfather. So until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.